Let's turn to Robert Penn Warren, poet, novelist, critic, and one of the co-architects of New Criticism. Born in 1905 and passing in 1989, Warren was a towering figure in American letters. He was not only a distinguished creative writer, but also one of the principal founders of New Criticism. Alongside Cleanth Brooks, he co-founded the Southern Review in 1935, an influential literary journal that became a key platform for new critical discourse. Warren's literary career holds an extraordinary distinction. He remains the only individual ever to have won Pulitzer Prizes in both fiction and poetry. These came for All the King's Men in 1947, Promises in 1958, and Now and Then in 1978. His fiction, most notably All the King's Men, explored the moral dilemmas of a South grappling with the decline of its traditional rural values, weaving together political commentary with profound psychological insight. Equally significant was his impact on literary pedagogy. His collaborative works with Brooks Understanding Poetry in 1938 and Understanding Fiction in 1943 codified many of the principles of New Criticism into a coherent and practical methodology for studying literature. Understanding Poetry became a cornerstone text in American universities, revolutionizing the teaching of poetry through its emphasis on close reading, structural analysis, and the intrinsic value of the text. As noted by the Modern American Poetry website, these works widely influenced the study of poetry at the college level in America and helped institutionalize new critical principles shaping English departments across the United States well into the 1960s. Through this dual legacy as both a creative artist and a critical theorist, Warren bridged the worlds of imaginative literature and scholarly analysis. His influence endures, marking him as one of the key figures in shaping the course of 20th century American literary criticism. Thomas Stearns Eliot, born in 1888 in St. Louis, Missouri, and later a naturalized British citizen, stands as one of the most influential poet critics of the 20th century. Widely recognized as the leader of the modernist movement, Eliot transformed poetry with The Waste Land in 1922 and Four Quartets in 1943, works that combined complex elusiveness, fragmented structure, and profound philosophical inquiry. Honored with the Order of Merit and the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948, Eliot shaped not only modern poetry but also the entire course of Anglo-American literary criticism. He often described his critical writings as the byproduct of his poetic workshop, reminding us that his theoretical formulations were inseparable from his own creative process. His criticism was marked by intellectual rigor, deep engagement with the Western canon, and a commitment to establishing objective criteria for literary judgment. Eliot's early collection, The Sacred Wood, Essays on Poetry and Criticism, published in 1920, introduced several of his most enduring ideas, including the theory of impersonality, the objective correlative, and a revaluation of the literary tradition. In his landmark essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, he argued that the poet's mind should function as a catalytic medium, surrendering personal emotion to the disciplined transformation of experience into art. His canon-shaping opinions praising the metaphysical poets, reassessing Dante, and expressing reservations about Milton left a lasting mark on academic curricula and critical discourse for decades. By uniting scholarly erudition with the sensibility of a practicing poet, Eliot bridged the creative and the critical realms. His influence helped solidify the principles of New Criticism, the autonomy of the text, the integration of form and meaning, and the disciplined precision of close reading. In doing so, Eliot secured his position as one of the defining critical voices of the modern era. Let's now explore T.S. Eliot's seminal essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, first published in 1919 and later included in The Sacred Wood, Essays on Poetry and Criticism in 1920. The essay is divided into three distinct parts: the concept of tradition, the theory of impersonal poetry, and the conclusion. In the first section, Eliot redefines the idea of tradition in a way that breaks from its usual, often negative connotation, noting that it seldom appears except in a phrase of censure. For Eliot, tradition is not a static inheritance, but a dynamic simultaneous order in which past and present are fused. Every new work, he argues, alters the existing literary landscape even as it is shaped by it. This organic tradition forms what Eliot famously calls the mind of Europe, encompassing the whole of the literature of Europe from Homer to the present. True talent, Eliot insists, cannot be inherited, and if you want it, you must obtain it by great labor. To illustrate the unity of this literary heritage, Eliot draws on examples from classical and Shakespearean drama, referring explicitly to Agamemnon and Othello. The poet, then, must consciously engage with this historical continuum. The second section presents Eliot's theory of impersonal poetry, which directly rejects the romantic emphasis on the poet's personal emotions. For Eliot, poetry must be essentially impersonal, distinct from the writer's personality, since the poet continually surrenders to the vast order of tradition. Artistic creation, he explains, is a process of depersonalization, something he compares to a chemical reaction. In this analogy, the poet acts as a catalyst, while the reactants are emotions and experiences. These elements are synthesized into a new artistic form, but the greatness of the poem does not depend on the raw emotions themselves, rather on the poet's skill in fusing them into a coherent and enduring work of art. This is why Eliot famously calls poetry an escape from emotion, emphasizing craft and discipline over mere self-expression. His ideal, impersonal poet aligns closely with John Keats' notion of the chameleon poet, one who effaces personal identity in order to inhabit varied voices and perspectives. Let's turn to one of his most provocative essays, Hamlet and His Problems from 1919. It first appeared in the Sacred Wood Essays on Poetry and Criticism in 1920 and was later republished in Selected Essays in 1932. In this essay, Eliot famously declared that Hamlet is most certainly an artistic failure, a verdict that has echoed through critical debates for more than a century. For Eliot, the problem does not lie in the character of Hamlet himself, but in the play as a whole. The main figure, he argues, is a secondary issue. In fact, Eliot suggests that Hamlet attracts a particular type of critic with a creative bent who projects his own personality onto the character. Goethe, for example, reshaped the tragic hero into his own Werther, while Coleridge's lecture on Hamlet effectively transformed Hamlet into a Coleridgean figure. Eliot dismisses such readings as the most misleading kind possible, because they divert attention away from the structural and thematic issues of the play. Instead, Eliot praises J.M. Robertson and Elmer Edgar Stoll for critiques that focus on the broader dramatic framework, particularly Robertson's historical approach to Hamlet. He identifies three probable sources for Shakespeare's tragedy: Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, the lost Ur Hamlet, and a German version performed during Shakespeare's lifetime. Adopting Robertson's view, Eliot argues that the famous delay motif is not primarily about avenging the father, but about Hamlet's fixation on his mother's guilt. However, Shakespeare, he insists, failed to integrate this altered psychological motive with the material inherited from his sources. This leads to the most enduring contribution of Eliot's essay, The Popularization of the Objective Correlative. He defines it as a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, and adds that the artistic inevitability lies in this complete adequacy of the external to the emotion. In Hamlet, Eliot claims Shakespeare fails to provide an adequate objective correlative for the protagonist's feelings. As a result, Hamlet's emotions cannot be fully expressed within the play's dramatic framework, and the audience is left unable to localize those feelings in the surrounding action. Let's step into 1921 influential essay, The Metaphysical Poets. In this work, Eliot offers a bold re-evaluation of 17th century English poetry, focusing especially on the achievements of John Donne and Andrew Marvell. To sharpen his argument, Eliot draws contrast not only between John Dryden and John Milton, but also with French masters like Jean Racine and Charles Baudelaire. This cross-cultural comparison allows him to trace changes in poetic technique and sensibility over time. He singles out Marvell's Horatian Ode for its telescoping of images and multiplied associations, a phrase that captures one of the defining features of metaphysical poetry. Here, multiple and seemingly unrelated ideas are compressed into a single, striking poetic moment. For Eliot, this compression and fusion of thought and feeling generate an intense intellectual and emotional complexity that both challenges the reader and enriches the poem's depth. At the heart of the essay lies Eliot's famous concept of the dissociation of sensibility. He argues that in the 17th century there existed a unified mode of poetic thought in which intellect and emotion were fused seamlessly, but that this unity was fractured in the later neoclassical period. As he memorably puts it, the metaphysical poets could feel their thought as immediately as the odor of a rose, while later poets experienced thought and feeling as separate entities, a split that, in Eliot's view, diminished poetic vitality. Let's explore three of Eliot's most significant critical works, each reflecting a different stage in his thinking about literature, criticism, and culture. We begin with The Function of Criticism, published in 1923. In this essay, Eliot critiques a strain of subjective literary criticism that leans too heavily on what he calls the critic's inner voice, citing J. Middleton Murray as an example. Eliot insists that genuine criticism must pursue a higher critical objectivity, a disciplined quest for shared principles capable of guiding the appreciation and perfection of art. Unlike the creative artist, the critic's task is to situate works within the continuum of tradition, showing how newer works relate to their predecessors so that readers can understand their true meaning and assess their artistic merit. For Eliot, criticism is never autonomous or self-justifying. It exists in direct response to literature itself. The critic is not there to indulge in personal judgment, but to illuminate the text for others using comparison, technical analysis, and historical understanding. Through this, criticism corrects taste and fosters a communal literary sensibility rooted in shared cultural and artistic standards. A decade later, Eliot expanded these ideas in The Use of Poetry and the Use of Criticism, published in 1933, and based on a series of 8 Harvard lectures delivered in 1932 and 1933. Here, Eliot examines the interdependent yet distinct roles of poet and critic. Poets, he argues, channel language to express deep cultural and personal subtleties, while critics are responsible for mediating and interpreting that expression for readers. Poetry, in his view, arises organically from a shared linguistic and cultural consciousness, and criticism must honor that creative act by offering just and discerning evaluation. Eliot rejects purely academic or detached criticism, proposing instead that it facilitates what he calls a proper accommodation between the personality of the poet and the autonomous structure of the poetic work. Importantly, he emphasizes that criticism cannot definitively define poetry or provide a final judgment. Its role is to guide understanding and enjoyment, helping readers form a relationship with the work's internal integrity. Finally, in Notes Towards the Definition of Culture, published in 1948, Eliot moves beyond literary criticism into the realm of cultural philosophy. Originally appearing as a series of essays before being collected into book form, this work presents his conservative and organic vision of culture. Eliot defines culture as an inherited system of values, institutions, and behaviors passed primarily through the family that cannot be artificially engineered or imposed from above. He warns against reductive political frameworks, especially liberal democracy's tendency toward cultural leveling, and instead champions the necessity of stable elite institutions and the presence of social classes as essential for cultural transmission. In a striking metaphor, he describes culture as the lived water in which a people swim, encompassing religion, family life, education, manners, and the arts. This cultural framework, he argues, is the bedrock upon which literary and artistic traditions flourish. Without it, societies risk cultural decay through homogenization.